Hello, namaskar, everybody. Tashidelek, everybody. Good morning to our friends in USA. Good afternoon to our friends in Europe, and good late evening to our friends in Taiwan, in Japan, in Australia. So today we are going to discuss a subject which is right now the whole world is watching China on the issue of human rights. And this time, it is the people of China who have risen up, uh, maybe because of not only COVID, but so many things which have been pent up for last so many years. So after 1989, this is the first time after a gap of 33 years that the people of China have risen up. And so now let us see whether this anger against the Chinese Communist Party and its leaders, is it going to be limited only on the issue of COVID-19, or it expands? The coming days are going to tell us how the things take shape. But this is also right time for the whole world to look at those parts of, if I can use the term, parts of China which have been occupied by China over last few decades. It is Tibet, it is East Turkestan, which they call Xinjiang, it is southern Mongolia, which they call Inner Mongolia, and of course, Hong Kong is the latest colony. And these colonies have been hoping to win back their freedom, their independence, and at least their basic human rights. So today we are going to discuss whether the people of these colonies can also hope that their human rights are re-established. And in the beginning, I'll give you a very short introduction of the organizer groups and our speakers. As we know, we this series of webinars is being organized jointly by the Center for Himalayan Asia Studies and Engagement and Tibetan Youth Congress. The Center for Himalayan Asia Studies and Engagement is a think tank, as you know, which is focused on understanding the issues which are impacting countries and societies in and around Himalayan Asia. And it's a platform for exchange of knowledge, views, and perspectives among Indian and international experts, researchers, writers, and sorry, and those advocacy groups who are working on political, social, economic, and strategic issues. Tibetan Youth Congress, as all of us know, is the largest socio-political organization of Tibetan diaspora. It's active for the last about 50 years, and it's uh, besides being the largest organization, it is the most active organization which represents uh, almost every section of the Tibetan diaspora. And this is a group which is fighting for total independence of Tibet. And as I always say, sorry, uh, TYC has emerged over the years as a wonderful nursery of talent among Tibetan diaspora. Those who have been members of this organization today, we see them at the best of places, like Sikyong, the president or prime minister of Tibetan government in exile, the ministers, the parliamentarians, the judiciary, intellectuals, and other social organizations have been on one or other time workers and members of Tibetan Youth Congress. And today we have three main speakers. One is Kai Mueller, as we always he's our one of our veteran speakers, and he's a very kind speaker in the sense that even on short notice, he is enthusiastic to join us and is kind to accept our invitation. Kai Mueller, he is the executive director of the International Campaign for Tibet in Germany, and he holding a responsibility of coordinating ICT's United Nations related advocacy, and other organizations. He presents the case of Tibet in various parliaments and UN human rights bodies. He is a jurist and a social scientist by his training, and his studies in social studies and international relations perspective of the situation across the world. And as we all know, ICT, the International Campaign for Tibet, it promotes the self-determination and human rights of Tibetan people, and it has its offices in Washington, Brussels, Berlin, and Amsterdam. We have our other friend, Enghebatu Togochok, who is from southern Mongolia. He is the director of Southern Mongolian Human Rights Information Center, which is based in New York. And he is dedicated to promoting and protecting human rights of the Mongolian people in the Chinese occupied southern Mongolia. And he is editor in chief of Southern Mongolia Watch, which is published in quite a few languages: English, Japanese, Chinese, and Mongolian. And he himself has very good command of all these languages. And he was born in 1972 in southern Mongolia, and later on he shifted to 1998 to USA under quite difficult circumstances. And since then he has been uh, in the vanguard of the movement of freedom for southern Mongolia people from the Chinese occupation. And he has made presentations before various international forums, the UN Human Rights Council, the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues of the UN Forum on Minority Issues, the US Congress also, and European Parliament. So welcome, Enghebatu, once again to this discussion group. And we have a new guest this time who is joining us first time, but he is quite experienced young man, Tenzin Lekdhen. He belongs to the Students for a Free Tibet, and he is the campaign director of Students for a Free Tibet. Uh, Tenzin Lekdhen, he is a graduate from University of Delhi. As you will know, that a very large number, rather majority of the Tibetans who have risen to best of places, they have had their education in India. And in that sense, India has been their second home. So, and Students for Free Tibet is one of the most proactive Tibetan organization, which is in very close association with the students of universities from various countries. And in India, um, SFT has played a very important role in taking up the cause of Tibet and uh, spreading awareness among the Indian youths. So, so now it's for me to, and yes, of course, we have Professor Ayushi Ketkar with us. She's a professor at University, the Jawaharlal Nehru University, who is a very active coordinator in this series of discussions. And she's an expert on international affairs and security matters. And currently, she is teaching at the Social Center for National Security Studies at JNU. And she has been with other universities like Symbiosis University, Gautam Buddha University, and she is co-author of a very popular book, which is titled is Geopolitics of Himalayan Region. So welcome, Mayushi, to in this forum today. And now it's time to leave the floor to our learned speakers. So may I request Enghebatu Togochog to please start and introduce the issue. And everybody is keen to know what are the expectations of people of southern Mongolia, Tibet, Xinjiang, Hong Kong in the ongoing upheaval inside China. Enghebatu Togocho, please.
Thank you. Greetings to everyone. As always, thank you, my dear friend Vijay, and your colleagues for giving us this opportunity to talk about human rights conditions and East Turkestan in the context of ongoing uprising in China proper. I'm not in any sense a Chinese expert or Chinese human rights expert, but from the information made available by news and social media, I observed some similarities as well as some differences between the recent uprising in China proper and the resistance movement in southern Mongolia. First of all, both Southern Mongolian resistance movement and the Chinese uprisings are leaderless, decentralized movement. In 2020, South Mongolians stood up to the Chinese government policy of Mongolian language and erasing Mongolian identity in Southern Mongolia. All walks of life of Mongolian society in Southern Mongolia joined this mass movement in one way or another to demand the national freedom and then right to use their mother tongue, practice their culture, and maintain their national identity. There was no single leader or single coordinating body in this movement, which made it a bit more difficult for the Chinese regime to carry out targeted crackdown. The recent Chinese uprising, which is popularly known as Blank Paper Movement or Baiji Yundong, does not seem to have any leaders or any centralized coordination. But it doesn't mean that the regime will not find anyone to punish. Actually, the latest news report and social media information revealed that many of those who showed up in the protest are either arrested, detained, or forcibly disappeared. In Southern Mongolian case, we estimate 8 to 10,000 Mongolians were arrested, detained, and put under house arrest since August 2020. The second similarity moments are massive in scale and defined in nature. In Southern Mongolian case, almost the entire Southern Mongolian population showed their disobedience to the Chinese regime. Students took to the streets, parents refused to send their children to school, teachers and professors rallied all Mongolians to rise up and say no to the new round of cultural genocide. Um, Even the government officials and party members refused to support the regime. In the Chinese blank paper movement, young people, especially the college students, are very active in showing their defiance or civil disobedience to the regime through rallying, holding blank paper, breaking through the fences and leaving the schools and factories. Uh, for the factory workers leaving their factories. So, what are the major differences between the Chinese uprising in China proper and the resistance movement in the Chinese occupied nation of Southern Mongolia? At least from Southern Mongolian perspective, there are several major differences. One, the demands are different. What the Chinese people are explicitly demanding is simply the lifting of COVID restriction, at least on the surface. Throughout history, Chinese people are known for their unbelievably high degree of resistance to oppression. Throughout the history, Chinese people are known for their unbelievably high degree of tolerance to oppression, thanks partially to the Confucius philosophy of Ren, or tolerance toward authority. Historically, Chinese people are unconditionally obedient to the rulers until their most basic rights are taken away. If Chinese people are rising up, that means the conditions has gone far beyond the level that ordinary people can tolerate. Some argue that Chinese people can live without political rights, without freedom, without liberty, without human rights, and without human dignity, as long as you give them the most basic necessity, like food and shelter. Therefore, still, some argue that the Chinese people and the Chinese regime, including the communist government, always had some unwritten agreement in which the regime agrees not to harass the citizens as long as they gave up all of their rights and dignity. But now Xi Jinping broke this rule. Not only did he take away all the rights and dignity of the entire Chinese population, but also started harassing them. This seems to anger the Chinese people and force them to stand up. But the main demand seems to be simple and practical. The main demand seems to be simple and practical. It's in Chinese called jiefeng, or relief the restriction. So the grown on the Chinese soil, the regime is well aware of how to satisfy this type of demand of the Chinese people. And the restriction is relaxed recently, and the population, for the most part, returned to the original state of obedience, at least for the time being. In the case of Southern Mongolia, the demand is totally different. It was the more abstract. The demand was the right to mother tongue, right to national dignity. The second difference, the second difference is the level of cohesiveness of the society. Thanks to decades, even centuries long high pressure despotism, unfortunately, Chinese population is highly atomized and lacks social cohesiveness. Especially during the 7 decades of communist rule, civil societies and social institutions that are critical ingredients for a social cohesiveness have completely been destroyed, leaving no room for population to engage in any form of self-organization, let alone large-scale civil disobedience. A popular Chinese social media catchphrase goes, "The entire Chinese population is the entire Chinese population is no better than 1.4 billion chives." Just like chives have no resistance to the cutting knife, the 1.4 billion Chinese people have zero resistance to the oppression from the government. That's what the catchphrase means. And on the contrary, however brutal, however oppressive, and however destructive the Chinese colonial regime in southern Mongolia may be, the Mongolian population still um, has certain degree of social cohesiveness, owing partially to the historical memory of who we were and collective conscious of who we are. This is best manifested in the 2020 mass protest. Policies from elementary school teachers to university professors, from ordinary teachers, herders to city dwellers, from traditional artists to modern musicians, from taxi drivers to delivery men, from government officials to police officers. All walks of life of the Mongolian society stood up in an unprecedented level of sense of oneness to say no to the Chinese colonial regime. So the third difference is the nature of the resistance. From the slogans and posters, the Chinese uprising can clearly be be identified as a civil rights, human rights, or even possibly a political rights movement. And the goal of the Chinese protest is clearly directed for the improvement of the condition of Chinese people and possibly democratizing the society and democratizing freedom. Although this goal is not always explicitly stated, the nature of Southern Mongolian resistance is anti-colonial movement. It's a national self-determination movement. Our goal is not to perfect the Chinese society to become part of the Chinese population, but our goal is to reclaim our independence and restore our national dignity. So I believe the same is true for Tibet and East Turkestan, even Hong Kong. The ultimate goal of the resistance movement of occupied nation is always to free themselves from any form of colonial determine their own political future. I think this is how I see this ongoing Chinese uprising from the perspective of occupied nation. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Enghebatu. The way you have explained and made it clear that although there is uprising on both sides among the people of the Han people of China, People's Republic of China, and also uprising among the South Mongolian people, but there is a basic difference. Both the demands and aspirations of both of them are different. And as you said, it's nice to hear that the people of Southern Mongolia are not going to rest until their national identity and their self-esteem and right to decide about themselves is restored. So, thank you very much, and I wish that your people of Southern Mongolia succeed in this noble struggle. So, thank you very much. And now we have our friend Kai Mueller, who has the distinction of looking at the entire range of movements against the Communist Party of China and the Chinese regime from by so many societies and so many nationalities, and of course the international view also. So I'm sure Kai has a much wider perspective for those people who would like to see the whole issue in a larger perspective. So we had a microscopic, very close view from Enghebatu, and now we will have, if I can use the term, a wide-angle view of the situation from Kai Mueller. So Kai Mueller, please.
To VJ, I hope I can live up to that promise to offer that wide angle view. I do have some specific views on Tibet to offer, but I also would like to look at the big picture on what this development in China may mean for the future. But first of all, thank you, VJ, and the Tibetan Youth Congress and Chase, the Center for Himalayan Asian Studies and Engagement, for having me today once again. We're talking, as said, today about the recent protests in China regarding the CCP's COVID policies. We all have taken note of the remarkable protest incidents throughout Chinese cities at the end of November. Apparently, the Chinese government has backed down and eased its COVID restrictions, which leaves it in an awkward position, I would say, as an authoritarian government can never be wrong on its policies per se. It will therefore be extremely interesting to note what kind of narrative the CCP will apply to justify its apparent giving in to that popular protest. And most interestingly, what the Chinese people will make out of it. Most importantly, I should say, and I do not want to forget, let us hope that those ineffective or mostly ineffective vaccines in China and the largely insufficient rates of vaccination in China do not lead to a dramatic increase in numbers of casualties from COVID in China, East Tibet, Southern Mongolia, and East Turkestan, and other places alike. Let me briefly lay out our understanding, ICT's understanding of what is the situation in Tibet. As said, concluding remarks, I'd like to move beyond Tibet and give some food for thought for what the protests may mean for China. I would like to thereby acknowledge my colleague Tenzin, who has done extensive research on this topic. On Tibet, on the days of protests in Chinese cities, end of November, the office of the so-called leading group for Lhasa's response to the new coronavirus pneumonia epidemic, very long title, issued an announcement titled Notice of Behavior to Tibetans in Lhasa. While COVID-related public notices are frequently issued, this notice of behavior, dated from November 27, is extraordinarily long and comprehensive in laying out the prohibitions on the relevant laws applicable for punishment. The notice carried no less than 44 points on prohibited behaviors, with point number 28, notably warning that, I quote, those who use the novel coronavirus infection pneumonia epidemic to create, spread rumors, incite secession, undermine national unity, or incite subversion of state power, overthrow the socialist system, are suspected of and shall be held criminally responsible, quote end. A day after protests erupted in Chinese cities, the party secretary of the so-called Tibet Autonomous Region, Wang Junsheng, presided over a standing committee meeting, issued instructions to prioritize stability and struggle against separatists, so-called separatists, to safeguard the political security of China. For example, then on November 28, the authorities suspended the religious activities in Khatse Monastery in Sichuan in eastern Tibet, leaving the monks and local Tibetans puzzled over the reasons. Monks in the monastery could not congregate for their religious offering, prayers, and local religious Tibetans' access to the monastery was very limited. So here we see again the direct impact of those COVID policies to religious and cultural lives of Tibetans. Similarly, Tibetans in northern Tibet and others in East Turkestan were ordered by the authorities to stay confined to their homes beginning the evening of November 27. While the authorities came for home visits to assess the COVID situation, the public were prohibited from leaving their homes. It is noteworthy that there wasn't a single concurrent solidarity protest in Tibet. It should be also noted that while information from the far west travels rapidly to the Chinese heartland in the east, the reverse is not true. This is glaringly clear from the current round of protests in China. Tibetans, by and large, were unaware of the massive but quickly cooled down protests in China. When asked, a Tibetan in Lhasa told the International Campaign for Tibet, I quote, "I have not heard about the protests in China. I think 95% of the Tibetans would be unaware of the protests in Chinese cities." Second, unlike the protests by Chinese in China, and here we see again another distinction as alluded to by Enghebatu Togoshok as well, protests in Tibet and East Turkestan are perpetually labeled as separatism or extremism, irrespective of their genuine grievances and aspirations. This has not been, by and large, the case with regard to protests by Chinese, who actually were successful even in their protests. Certainly, in the eyes of the party, the Chinese demands are legitimate, but the Tibetan demands would be separatism if a concurrent protest sparks off in Tibet. This is true not only from the protests in China, but also observed during the Chinese migrants' protests in Lhasa a little over the month ago in October. Because of the suffocating COVID measures in Lhasa, when the Chinese migrants staged a coordinated and large-scale protest on October 28, to be allowed back to their hometowns. They were on their way home the very next day. They exited so quickly. We were told that the authorities had a hard time clearing the traffic from Lhasa to China. It must be noted that Tibetans' participation in the Chinese migrants' protests in Lhasa was minimal, except for a possible few joining them. While a horrific fire in East Turkestan catalyzed the protests in China, with the Chinese venting out their frustration at COVID controls on their lives to the point of uttering Xi Jinping step down, none of the protesters shouted free Tibet or free East Turkestan or free Xinjiang. The Chinese urban middle class and the students could relate their lives under COVID lockdowns to those burned to death in an apartment building under COVID lockdown in the far west. But they still couldn't empathize with how it feels to live a suffocating and, if I may say, controlled life from day one of the establishment of the PRC. But this is also quite ambivalent. It seems to be changing, but not particularly in China, but outside of China. Because unlike their kin at home, Chinese in solidarity protests in foreign countries, most prominently in the United States and also in Europe uttered the previously unheard of during Chinese protests, even in foreign countries. Some of the protesters shouted the unimaginable free Tibet, free East Turkestan, free Xinjiang during the solidarity protests for their compatriots at home. Concluding, the protests may ring the alarm for the autocratic leadership around Secretary General Xi Jinping. After all, what if the voices of the brave few multiplied and Xi and the Communist Party could no longer hold on to power? This is an unlikely, and it seems even an unreal scenario, given how accustomed we have become or are meant to become to the omnipotence of the Communist Party. But as in the case of Russia, entrenched assumptions can be proven wrong. And as in the case of Russia, and many are already doing so, we must grapple with the question of what comes after the autocrat. Will a peaceful transformation of China be possible? And what role will the many peoples colonized by Beijing, the Tibetans, the Uyghurs, the Mongolians, play in this? Are there blueprints, ideas, suggestions for a way out of a potentially explosive situation? The current protests should give reason to think as this as well. They may even force one to do so. And one would get answers and leads perhaps right away. There is the Charter 08 by the late Liu Xiaobo. There are the Tibetans who have made many constructive suggestions as to what peaceful coexistence could look like. There's the 1987 5-point peace plan, the 2008 memorandum on genuine autonomy for the Tibetan people, and the Dalai Lama's middle way approach. And these proposals do not only refer to Tibet, but could be an inspiration for fair balance of interest between all parties involved. China policy and strategy development should deal intensively with these scenarios. I may emphatically say we have to think the unthinkable. I'm looking forward to hearing the presentations of the participants, of my colleague from Students for Free Tibet on this webinar, and would like to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Kai Mueller. You have very nicely presented how things, how the difference between how the Chinese reacted and how Tibetans reacted, and how the Chinese, Han Chinese, who have been what I call demographic colonialism, as a part of demographic colonialism, how the way China has brought in millions of Han Chinese from the mainland to these colonies, to Tibet and to Xinjiang. And as you said, that this was first time that it was not the local Tibetans or local Uyghurs, it was the Han settlers who rose up and raised a voice against the Communist Party of China and Xi Jinping. And it was interesting to know from you that the Chinese who are living abroad, the way they reacted and their anger and their support for sympathy for their people inside China. And it was very interesting and pleasing to know that there were Chinese who raised slogans of free Tibet and free Xinjiang. That's very interesting. So thank you very much for enlightening us on these aspects, which are very little known outside the, the movement circles to ordinary citizens. So thank you very much for this. And now we have our, I would say, this is his maiden appearance, Tenzin Lekdhen, who is a prominent leader of students for a free Tibet. And he is handling the communications and campaigns of SFT as an expert. So, Tenzin Lekdhen, we would love to have your perspective on this issue. Tenzin Lekdhen, please.
All right. All right. Thank you, Vijay Krantiji and Chase and Tibetan Youth Congress for organizing this panel discussion. And my greetings to my fellow panelists. I'm in no way expert on the subject at all, but yeah, just doing my bits. All right, then. So, greetings to the viewers who are watching us live. Today's topic was human rights of Chinese colonies in the context of ongoing protests in China. I think what we need to know, if we look back to the history, is that this is not the first time that we are witnessing such dissents and such large-scale protests in China and the other occupied regions. There have been 1959 Tibetan National Uprising, the 1987-88 Uprising, then the 1989 Tiananmen Square protest led by Chinese students and youth, the 1999 demonstration by approximately 10,000 Falun Gong practitioners, the 2008 uprising in Tibet, which was a major event in our Tibetan freedom struggle. And then comes the 2022 protests in China and the other occupied regions. Just like Kai told that the Urumqi fire incident, though being the catalyst of the whole protest and the solidarity movement that it created, in which the fire incident in which approximately 10 to 15 people died during this strict COVID protocol, which in a way hindered the rescue operations. And then the wave of support and the solidarity protests in universities, where especially Nanjing University, this Tsinghua University, where people of all walks of life participated in showing their support, showing their solidarity for the movement, especially. But what we need to look upon is that we shouldn't, just lower the expectation of the protest, and reducing it to just saying that it's just a COVID against the zero COVID policy. So, because when we look upon and what the slogans were raised, was it only about COVID lockdown? I don't think so, because I think there was something else that the citizens were concerned about, and so that people on the street were demanding not just the end of the COVID lockdown. I think they were showing discomfort with the leadership, discomfort with the party, discomfort with Xi Jinping, and they also raised issues about human rights, and there were slogans about democracy. People were saying like Xi Jinping step down, CCP step down. I think it speaks volume that the peoples, especially Chinese, the Han settlers, are not just concerned about the COVID lockdown, but they're seeing in a way a bigger picture that under the party, under the Chinese Communist Party, and under their repressive policy, not just Tibetans and the other occupied people are suffering, but the Chinese majority, the Chinese Han, are also suffering under the repressive policies. So is it just the COVID lockdown and the zero COVID policy that made these huge eruption of protests? But I think we need to look back upon how, like after 1989, when the Chinese students led the Tiananmen Square protest, and right now in 2020, after 33 years, Vijay Krantiji said, after 33 years, such like big protests happened after 33 years, led by the Chinese especially. So in the 30 years, I think there has been many political, social changes. Like I think first would be the CCP, and Xi Jinping securing the third term and naming himself the president for life, and the zero COVID policy being implemented, and how it was implemented in what matters, I think, is what matters. People being caged in their building, not getting proper medicine on time, and being fed spoiled food. I think many of us might have seen videos or photos of such people, especially in Lhasa, when people were fed spoiled noodles. I think that speaks volume of how it was implemented in that manner. And when people started protesting in a way, and then in the internet, when in Weibo and elsewhere, when they started pouring out their complaints and sharing the state in which they have to live, the Lhasa authorities even gave a public apology to the netizens. So I think such developments, people have started to question the government on their policies and its implementation. So I think when people are for months being caged up, and I think they are fed up. The Urumqi fire incident just set the precedent for them, just catalyzed them to speak about else than just the lockdown and the COVID policy, because they know how the COVID policy was implemented, how the political changes happened, and I think in a way that might be one of the reasons for it. And when we talk about zero COVID policy, I think we need to know what the Chinese Communist Party, how the Chinese Communist Party used this COVID policy. Zero COVID for the CCP was an opportunity to further repress, to further suppress the people. CCP and Xi Jinping as the leader, I think since the PRC inception, has been a totalitarian state, suppressing and oppressing their own people, voices being silenced and holding tight control over China. So even after the third time, she has vowed to not, even to further, she had vowed to further extend the lockdown, and has been continuing to oppress the people. So in the context of the ongoing people's uprising, I think it's crucial for the government as in the Chinese Communist government and the Chinese Communist Party, to respect the right of those involved, including the right to peacefully assemble and the freedom of expression. So any use of force by the government must be proportionate and necessary, and must not violate the human rights of those involved in the uprising. It is also important for the government to listen to the concerns of the people and address their grievances in a peaceful and constructive manner. In the sense that why I said that before was like, when we talk about human rights, we need to know that what the aftermaths, or what happened after the protests, because for a couple of days, I don't think we have been hearing any news regarding the any more protests. People were forced to show their phone in China, especially, to check if they have any materials related to the protests, which is a direct threat to their basic rights to information. They were forced to delete footages, and especially like videos and photos if they had any in their phones. Protesters who had been identified were being detained and jailed. Also in Tibet, in Darjeeling County, 4 Tibetan women were imprisoned for participating in the protest against the zero COVID policy. One, I think, participated in the Nanjing protest, and the other in Tsinghua University. So many of the protesters were later faced with harassment and police brutality. So that's how even when we speak up, this is just a recent event when people started to speak up, when people started to complain to their own government. They were forcefully repressed and oppressed, and they were in a way detained and imprisoned for that matter. So in the context of human rights in Tibet, I think we have to know about the policy of Xi Jinping, not just the zero COVID policy which we are talking about. We need to talk about the sinicization of under Xi Jinping's current government. So so the sinicization, the policy that they are implementing in Tibet, threatening Tibetan language, Tibetan culture and religion, in a way that they're trying to say that even in Tibetan religion, I think they're saying that Tibetan Buddhism with Chinese characteristics, and which I think in a way directly threatens the Tibetan identity. So these 3 steps they are following, like Tibetan language, culture, and sinicization of the Tibetan religion, through which they are trying to control the narrative, and they are trying to eradicate the identity as a Tibetan. One example would be the colonial boarding school, where nearly 1 million Tibetan children today live in these colonial boarding schools and preschools. 1 million Tibetan children, from which I think 100,000 are aged 4 to 6 in preschools, 800 to 900,000 children aged 6 to 18 in primary and secondary schools. Children living apart from their families are made to speak in the Mandarin, the Chinese language, and are blocked from accessing their own language and culture. Family are coerced into sending their children to these colonial boarding schools, both through threats and by the authorities, and lack of having any alternatives to attend any other schools, which I think is very much similar to what's happening right now in southern Mongolia too. Because I read the 2020 report where similar policies were being implemented in southern Mongolia. So imagining, on niece, or like my own niece and nephews, living in such boarding schools, it creates a sense of urgency that is a direct threat to our own Tibetan language, now to Tibetan culture, now own Tibetan identity, and the survival and the very survival of the Tibetan identity, I think. And one of the other policy measures they are right now implementing is the forcefully collecting DNAs from Tibetans. Now the states have gone to like biosurveillance states, where they are now forcefully collecting the DNAs of Tibetans from all age, even from 4 to 5 years old. We have found now that I think it started from 2016, 17, 18, 19 till now, and the company that is selling the the DNA collection kits to the Chinese PLA army and the Chinese police is Thermo Fisher, which is a US-based, Boston-based company, which has previously sold the same kits to China, where they collected the DNA in East Turkestan, and in 2019, I think, which with much protest from the East Turkestan and Uyghurs, they in a way halted and they stopped, and they said that they are now stopping and they're not sending their kits anymore to China. But now I think they're resuming their trade, resumed their deal with China. So I think it is one of the most brutal and in a way how they are subtly in a subtle way trying to oppress, and how they march surveillance and to further oppress the Tibetans in Tibet. So, in this context of the ongoing protests, and I think there has been a mass solidarity movement created outside of China, in US, Europe also, and Taiwan. In Taipei too, they held vigil, candle vigil for the victims and marked their solidarity. And in India too, we did it. I think there was a very good example when our SFT members, SFT activists from New York, New Jersey, and SFT Colombia went to a the vigil in support of for the victims of the Urumqi fire incident. When the Tibetans went with our activists from SFT New York, New Jersey went with their flags, the protesters or the solidarity showers who were there were predominantly Chinese, and when they saw the Tibetan flags, they said, "Oh, free Tibet!" I think we have, when we talk about people facing atrocities under CCP, we need to know that the Chinese too are in it. When they rise and oppose the CCP, knowing the consequences, I think we need to support and show our solidarity. We are one in this fight, and our enemy is one. I'm not equating the hardship and atrocity faced by the occupied people with the majority Han settlers in mainland China, but under the current regime, under the current totalitarian regime and the Chinese Communist Party, that we are all victims. So I think it is important to know that in this fight against tyranny and fight against dictatorship, fight for freedom and human rights, we are all in this fight together. Tibetans, Uyghurs, Mongolians, Taiwanese, Hong Kongers, Chinese, and our allies in India, US, Europe, and everywhere else. I would like to conclude my remarks here. Thank you.
Thank you, Tenzin Lekdhenji, for presenting this Tibetan perspective, and especially the way you explained the response, common response of not only those who are oppressed, the Tibetans, Uyghurs, and Mongolians or Hong Kongers, but also the response of the Han Chinese who were suppressed, that they realized the commonality. Sorry, that this time, after a very, very long time, there is an atmosphere where Han Chinese citizens are somewhere realizing or underlining the commonality of suffering because of suppression at the hands of Chinese Communist Party. So thank you once again. Now, after our all three honorable speakers have made their points, I'm sure there are a few questions. Ayushi Ketkar has been keeping watch on these questions. Ayushi, do you have some questions for our speakers? And before when we conclude, of course, I will request all the speakers to give their concluding remarks. But before that, Ayushi, please.
Thank you, sir. Two, three interesting Hello? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Now we can hear you, but there is some problem in your image. It has gone perpendicular. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So a couple of interesting points that have come about. One is the role of terminology, where, and I mean, this particularly, probably even Vijay sir, even you can comment on this, because you often see that the terminology used by scholars and activists, sometimes there is a dichotomy in it, making the regime, play a very, I mean, use it to their advantage. Like, for instance, where many a times this is called about genocide, the activists would call what's happening in East Turkestan as genocide. Uh, you would see the Chinese regime call it as terrorism or separatism. So somewhere, I think being on the same platform in terms of the terminology being used is very important to even come at a consensus about how to deal with it. So probably I would I would want the scholars, the experts today on the panel to comment on that. The second aspect, which has very clearly come about, and this is a very important aspect, is the role of civil society and fellow citizens. I mean, now with the Han population actually supporting these movements, whether it's the Tibetan movement, the East Turkestan movement, how do you think this will change the entire equation of how these movements are now seen by the world at large? Because still now Chinese deep pockets have made it almost, a very difficult struggle, whether for Tibetans or whether for Mongolians, for East Turkestanis. In fact, even for Taiwan for that matter. So, how do you see the role of civil society with special reference to fellow citizens like Han population supporting various movements? How do you think this is going to change the dynamic? And the last and final question is, do you see a hierarchy in terms of these movements? Like, for instance, at the higher rung, do you see the Taiwanese and the Tibetan movement, and at a slightly lesser importance being given to East Turkestan and South Mongolia for reasons I think best known to you, and probably you can even throw light on it. So, do you see a hierarchy happening here? And well, these are the three things that have come about through various platforms.
Okay, thank you. Should we start with the Kai?
Yes, thank you, Professor Ketka. I mean, these are very pertinent questions we put. I would just like to comment on terminology and perhaps civil society. I think what actually is the decisive factor here in using of language is, I think, for the international community, is international law. And I think if it comes to defining or determining anything as crimes against humanity or genocide, it is international law that is decisive here, and which offers us an objective criteria. If you look at the Genocide Convention, for example, which is fairly clear on what can constitute genocide, along with case law and jurisprudence over the years. So in terms of East Turkestan, several parliaments and governments have declared this, what is going on there, their developments as being actually a genocide. And of course, I think it's absolutely not surprising that the Communist Party is in disagreement with this determination. But what matters is the reality on the ground. Same goes for Tibet, I think, where we really need to have a very, very close look at what comes and what means the so-called sinicization policy. It's something in its incarnation today. It's a novel development and something very worrisome. So we need to have a very close look at this development again in terms of legal categories and determination. Civil society, I would just be, I mean, speaking about terminology, be very careful about using this term with regard to People's Republic of China and the territories under the CCP control, because it necessarily implies that there are, that there's space for civil society, which is guaranteed by a constitution, by rule of law, by a democracy, a freedom of press, all of which does not exist. So I would be rather hesitant to use this term civil society when it comes to CCP rule in China, Tibet, East Turkestan, Xinjiang, and southern Mongolia, because there is no civil society according to this definition. It is probably citizen engagement or local community engagement in matters. But certainly, what we view have been viewed and monitored over the past weeks or months has been something different. It is a sort of more popular, more broad protest, but as it has been said, more not organized as such. And with regard to the hierarchy, I would leave it to my colleagues here. Thank you.
Okay, you, Enghebatu, you would like to comment?
Sure. I would like to comment on the terminology. It's a very interesting topic. It's a really critical topic that we should be discussing, and because language really matters, and especially when it comes to the controversial names, like for example, well, to us it's not controversial at all. For example, Southern Mongolia, and then the Chinese always says inner Mongolia. When you say inner, that definitely you are knowingly, unknowingly, you are standing in Beijing to look at the geography, the world geography. That's all on the Chinese justifying the Chinese regime, the terminology and Chinese propaganda. Same is true for like the so-called Xinjiang or and then Tibet in Tibet in English. Tibet is easier, just there's no meaning of west or east, but in Chinese word the Tibet is called Xizang. I mean, it's again, I mean, to the Tibetans themselves, it's pointless to call themselves west or east. I mean, they so and then another terminology that you mentioned is genocide. Yes, unfortunately we are living in a world where the recognize the genocide is really as a tiny fraction of the committed genocide, and that there are so many authoritarian regime dictatorships around the world that committing genocide almost on daily basis. But the world or so-called international community or international law so reluctant to recognize this as a genocide. Please tell us, like, how many real genocide that recognized in the world? The Armenian genocide, after 100 years later, it was recognized. What the use of recognizing that genocide after 100 years? Now the genocide is committed in acceptable. If with this attitude, the world will never gonna be a better place. This is my opinion. And then about the civil society, yes, I totally agree with Kai, and that there's almost no civil society in the strict sense of civil society exist in southern Mongolia. I mean, East Turkestan and Tibet, even in the Chinese regime, Chinese government, and then CCP does not allow to exist any other civil society in true sense of civil society, because they consider anything like this will be the threat to their regime. So that's why it China is not able to. Chinese people are not able to organize themselves in a large scale. International community were so excited about China's recent uprising, but unfortunately, it easily been crashed by the Chinese regime. And then I am not really optimistic about Chinese, this movement continue to become another like a movement, like even closer to the 1989 Tiananmen, student movement, or so it's a situation there's no room for the civil societies, no room for the people to organize themselves, let alone becoming, having a large scale of civil disobedience in an organized manner. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. And now, Tenzila, you are a practitioner of communication and organization. How would you look at these issues from Tibetan perspective?
Sure, sure. I wanted to first say a few things about the terminology that's being used in the international communities, especially regarding the narration, the false narration created by the Chinese Communist Party, that is using Xinjiang and using Tibetan Autonomous Region as such. What we have to know is clearly that the Tibet as a whole, I'm just talking about Tibet for now, Tibet as a whole was historically divided into just three provinces, Uzang, Amdo, and Kham. And after 1959, they started to disintegrate and integrate them into their own provinces, which they call Xinjiang. So when we use the term like Yunnan province or the greater Kokonor up the region, the provinces up there, the Sichuan, Xinjiang, the Sichuan provinces, I think we need to be careful with those terms, because in the sense that Tibet as a whole has been, in a way, been forcefully integrated into their own region. It kind of like makes the whole map of Tibet into a smaller region, just limiting it to just Tibetan Autonomous Region. I think using those terms, like Yunnan or Sichuan, justifies the colonizer, justify the CCP government into further, using those terms and further making the owning those region. I think that's the first terminology that which we need to think about. And when we also say like the fellow citizens or like the minorities, I think we need to be careful with the term minority too, because it's a term that has been specifically and extensively used by the colonizers. We are not a minority, we are a different race. And I think we also need to work upon that, especially in the academias, when people use the terms minority and such, it justifies their own narration also. So the the next one was how it changes the movement, the civil society role in it. Earlier, I think would be the 2022 Beijing Olympic, when we had a successful campaign, I say. We had a cross movement allyship with Hong Kongers, with East Turkestan, with World Uyghur Congress and Southern Mongolians and Taiwanese as a whole, when we opposed the Beijing Olympics. I think in such a way, I think we can create and we can include the majority, the Chinese descendants in abroad, and we can include them into the movement. And when we plan out such bigger campaigns in the future, I think bringing their own voices in it, and bringing and using their narration as a plus point to our campaign, I think that would be a good plus point to do. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Although I'm moderating, but I am a bit, I feel like participating on this issue, especially as a communicator, as a journalist. I've been very closely watching for last 50 years how China very cleverly uses certain terminologies. It starts those terminologies and then implants them in the thinking process of the rest of world. You just imagine, have you ever seen any American when they deal with India or when they deal with Germany, any organization in America would be American or US German um, business body, US Indian somebody, no? Or similarly, India, when it deals with other countries, we use India as first and then the second country. But the whole word, whatever comes, it is Sino something, Sino US, Sino German, Sino Indian. And it is accepted by the Indians, accepted by Germans, by the US. It only shows how successful the Chinese have been in implanting even your basic thinking. There is some terminology as far as these colonies are concerned. I've been watching them very closely. For example, the word use of minority. They encourage using minority nationalities. As Tenzin Lekdhen very rightly pointed out, that when you define Tibetans or Uyghurs or Mongols as minority, then the basic question of their being not a part of China or being other races or other countries, that ends. So with the beginning itself, or the acceptance of this word as minority itself, makes it a kind of acceptance, admission that these are parts of China, only they are minorities, and China should be kind to them, to deal with them as parts of China and as minorities. So it's a way of recognition, international recognition given even without your thinking, without realizing how China is working on it. There is another term which is called internal matter. China has been impressing upon all the countries, including United Nations, that Tibet is an internal matter, Xinjiang is an internal matter, Inner Mongolia is an internal matter, Hong Kong is an internal matter. Why the whole world should accept it? The moment you accept it is an internal matter, whether it is US government or Indian government, the moment they say it is internal matter, they are recognizing the colonial occupation of China, of these countries. This, if you are not in a position to oppose China, suppose Indian government doesn't have the courage right now, or US has 10 reasons not to offend China, then okay, keep quiet. Don't call it internal matter. The moment you say it is internal matter, you are an accomplice in the crime of colonization. This, the world governments must realize that they are not only encouraging colonization of these countries, they are accepting it and they are legalizing it. And I think all these countries, whether it is America or Germany or India or any government, they need to be told, you have no right, legal, moral, or political, to announce that these are internal matters of China. No. Let them decide. You are nobody to decide the fate of a third country when you are dealing with China. So this is another crime, and terminology here, it matters. Same is with one China policy. When you say one China policy, initially it started with Taiwan. Only dispute was between Taiwan and People's Republic of China. And now China wants you to extend it to occupation of Tibet also, to East Turkestan also, Inner Mongolia. How they could extend this argument from Taiwan, which was limited to Taiwan, they have extended very successfully to include or cover the Tibet and East Turkestan and Southern Mongolia in this terminology. This has to be, we have to be very careful when using this terminology. And China has been claiming that there is these have been regions have been continuously part of China in history. They have to be shown the mirror of history, how for hundreds of years before 1912, China itself was not a nation. If at all it was an occupied nation for more than last 600 years. They were a colony of the Manchus. They were colony of the Mongols. And we very easily accept Manchurian food. The moment we say Chinese food, Manchurian Chinese food, we are recognizing the usurping of Manchuria by China. This is a crime which is committed on the dining table, which goes right into your heart, into your stomach. So I agree with my friends that the terminology must be used very carefully. It should not, if we are not in a position to challenge China, we should not kowtow to China, and we should not surrender by recognizing China's crime or China's sins in these countries by accepting this terminology. So that is a very interesting aspect. I'm sure we have a few. We could go on. So now I think it is time to conclude. May I ask our friends, our speakers, to please give their own concluding remarks, because besides presenting their perspective, they have heard others also. So maybe it helps in amalgamating your opinion or your inferences. If I request you to say it in 2 minutes each, let us start with the youngest one. Uh, Tenzin, please you start.
Okay, so closing remarks. I'm sorry, I didn't prepare for any closing remarks, but yeah, it was good talking to you all. I want to yet again focus, bring your attention to the forceful DNA collection in Tibet that is currently happening right now, and it is an ongoing campaign by Students for Free Tibet. We have went to their headquarters in Boston. We have delivered our letter there, and where we were forcefully, removed from the premises. So it is an ongoing campaign. So I would really appreciate if you guys could sign up to the petition, which is on our SFT International website and their social medias. It would be really great if we could sign up for the petition, and and sorry. And thank you, Vijayji, for organizing this, and to Tibetan Youth Congress. And I would, for the panelists, thank you so much. It's been great sharing this stage with you. And I hope that in the future we could, do more of such discussion, but practically work upon building some cross movement allyship and work on campaigns so that we could, bring out the stronger voices. All right, thank you.
Thank you. And Enghebatu, please,
Thank
your
you.
conclusion.
Okay, so as a Southern Mongolians, I always try to emphasize the see things from the Southern Mongolian perspective. So from the Southern Mongolian perspective, the question of occupied nations, including Southern Mongolia, Tibet, and East Turkestan, is not just an issue of human rights. It's not an issue of civil rights, but it is a question of decolonization and the question of national self-determination. This must be emphasized. And actually, many Chinese pro-democracy activists always try to convince us Mongolians that our common problem, or sometimes they even call our common enemy, is the Chinese So and then they always try to convince us that everything will be okay once the communist regime is taken down. The Mongolians are not really convinced with this, and then they became very careful, taking the face value of what the Chinese people promise. Because we have a long experience with the including Kuomintang, Chinese Communist Party. So they learn from history, they lesson from history. So I think I agree with what a Tibetan friend said at the conference a few years back. That he said Tibetans are the victims of trust, and then Chinese people are victims of distrust. So I agree with this, because at the beginning we really trusted what the Chinese Communist Party and then Chinese government promised. They said, "Hey, look, you guys can have your national autonomy. You can practice your culture. You can, speak your language." Those promises are all ended up with broken ones. So So the Mongolians, widely believe that the only way to guarantee their true national freedom and then national self determination is to regain their national sovereignty and
Yeah.
restore their national independence. There's no other way. You cannot just really say, hey, like we will have national freedom within the framework of People's Republic of China, or a future so-called possibly called Democratic China. The Mongolians do not buy that. They believe true independence is political independence, national independence.
Wonderful.
So I think this is the key difference between the Chinese demand and then demand of the peoples of occupied nation. Thank you.
Wonderful. So, Kai Mueller, now the last words from you.
Well, thank you very much, Vijay. I just wanted to follow up on your remarks, and I would basically I would say let's use the term peoples. They are Tibetan. It's a Tibetan people. It's the Mongolian peoples, and Uyghur peoples, instead of the rather problematic term of race. Also because the term peoples implies certain legal rights and a legal status, which has very much connected to the concept of self-determination. So that's one comment from my end. And also a second one, a rather peculiar consequence, since you mentioned the One China policy, which has been developed in order to be able to have a special relationship with Taiwan, particularly from the West. If Tibet was to be framed in the concept of One China policy, which some Western governments do, actually this would also mean that there would have to be a special relationship from Western countries with Tibet, maybe resulting in the opening up of an informal representation in Tibet from Western countries. So we see how confused actually Western policies are and terms are, and I agree full-heartedly with the need to really deconstruct what has been imposed on us in terms of language and narratives from the CCP, which many countries and the international communities to a certain degree have really accepted as or taken as acceptable. With regard to our subject of today, I'm very much ambivalent about what we right now see and monitor and have been seeing in China with regard to those anti-COVID policy protests by the Chinese. It remains to be seen whether anything tangible or anything very meaningful in terms of push or pull towards democracy or democratization comes out of this. But nevertheless, as I said in my presentation, I would like to have us look at the larger picture, and some of you have already mentioned this. My takeaway is that the CCP is not that omnipotent as we are meant to believe. The CCP is vulnerable, as it has maybe looked for a brief time, for a brief, very, very short period of time, looked into the abyss. Now, I think they have managed the situation according to what they think needs to be done. But this implies also we have to look beyond. We have to look at the larger picture and also have to be ready for change. And this, I mean, is a lesson that the West particularly needs to learn, also coming from a disastrous experience with how the West has assessed Russia And now the same should not be happening with regard to China. So policymakers need to be ready. They need to think, as I said emphatically, think the unthinkable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm sure it was quite useful for all of us and our audience. And now, may I ask Professor Ayushi Ketkar to please give your vote of thanks, and then we'll conclude with one announcement. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. On behalf of Chase, I wish to thank all the experts today, Kai Mueller, Enghebatu, and Tenzin for sparing their valuable time and as always supporting the cause of academic and activist involvement that we so profoundly encourage here in Chase, because we believe that this kind of dichotomies and the fissures that are existing today, that will be resolved to quite a large extent with this kind of engagement. So thank you so much. Kai and Enghebatu, you have been on our platform before, and we look forward to your regular engagement. It's very encouraging to have you with us and to help us out with the academic activities we do at Chase. Tenzin La, look forward to having you more often. And yes, you all are doing wonderful work. And we at Chase would like to extend our support in whichever manner we can. Very soon, we'll be starting our internship program as well, where some young scholars will be trained. I mean, obviously, we are hoping that Vijay Kranti sir mentors a lot more people, because there are very few scholars like him who can lead the way on various issues, especially pertaining to China. Because as you know, dealing with China is not an easy thing. And we at Chase look forward to doing that and developing the next rung leadership among scholars. So we'll very soon be launching our internship program, and we look forward to your mentorship even for that as well. So thank you once again, and over to you.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. And before I conclude and say goodbye, I have one announcement. We have been hearing of one issue, one subject too much in the air, which is about forcible harvesting of human organs in China. It has become a great business, a business which is worth billions of dollars. It is the leaders of Communist Party of China. It is the generals and big wigs of People's Liberation Army who give protection and who are very much part of this business, clandestine business, which is going on as a fair trade of medical service in China, where patients who require transplants of human organs, whether it is heart or liver or anything, or kidneys, they come to China at a very cheap price, and they don't have to wait like America for months and months for an organ, and they can place an order and get the right one of right blood group, because China is practicing harvesting of human organs from those who are living in the jails of China, whether they are Mongols, whether they are Uyghurs, whether they are Tibetans, whether they are Chinese themselves who have faith in Falun Gong or democracy movement. So they are kept as chickens in a chicken farm where you can place an order and they deliver it. So this is a horrible business which is going on. To draw attention to this business, our next program on 17th of this month will be on this issue, and we are going to send you a communication about the timing and the speakers. We have wonderful speakers who have been first-hand witness to this crime of the Chinese government for years, and they could manage to come out of China, and now they are speaking and telling this to the world. And we have another there is one researcher who has done very deep research on this subject. So in our next show, we are going to talk about illegal and inhuman harvesting of human organs. So since till then, we say goodbye And thank you very much, all our speakers and our audience. Thank you. Namaskar. Tashi Delek. Goodbye.
Thank you.